Hello, everyone. My name is Erin Broadwin. I'm a health tech reporter with Axios, and I have the distinct honor and privilege of moderating the panel that sits directly between all of you and happy hour. Fortunately, I have a bunch of guests here who are subject matter experts that I'm very excited to dig into venture capital with. I have Nancy Brown with Oak HCFT, Jessica Owens with Initiate Ventures, and Jason Robart with C Ventures. So I have a little trivia question to ask everyone. I just looked this up, and I was astounded by the answer. Do you know when the term digital health was actually coined? Any guesses? You can shout them out. 1960. OK, so the 97 is the closest. It's actually 2000. It was used to refer to like the internet improving medical content and things like that. Obviously not what we're used to digital health today. But obviously, venture-backed digital health companies have been through quite an evolution in recent years. In the early 2010s, venture dollars started flowing into digital health companies, including some startups, one startup called Omada Health that just went public. So on that note, I have many questions for all of you. My first question is about IPOs. We saw a cohort of digital companies go public in the 2010s era, 2011, 12, 15, 16, 17, 18. Actually, I'm thinking more 2018. And now we have a second cohort of digital health companies going public. We just saw Hinge Health, which is a virtual physical therapy company, and Omada Health, which is a metabolic care management company, go public. And we saw strikingly opposing performance from the two. So my question for all of you is, what is needed today for a successful health tech IPO?
Do you want to start?
You want me to start? Well, you know, it's funny. I think about this. You can imagine, with 93 active healthcare companies, we think about it a lot. And not all companies are made to go public. Let me start
Tell
there.
me more about that.
Yeah, so some companies are really made to go to a strategic buyer. They're made to be combined with another company for various reasons, like because you have a part of a platform, but you really need a whole platform. And then there's some that really cannot imagine anything other than going public, because by the time they go public, they feel like they're almost at the beginning of a journey. We've talked about Maven Clinic, one of my companies, which is not going public. I'm not announcing that. But I'm just saying that if you met Kate Ryder, that CEO, she is very determined. This is the beginning, you know, over 100 million revenue, but this is her beginning. This is a platform that will grow. And the best way for that to happen is for her to go public. But you have to have predictable revenue and predictable, back when I took a company public, I just want to say, that was the good old days. That was Athena Health. And you did not have profit. That was for other people. We took ourselves out, and the reason you didn't have profit is because you should throw all your money back into the company to innovate. Okay, that is not how people are looking at this anymore. People want to make sure that the services that you're providing, that you can have year-over-year growth that's predictable, and that you have a margin that's sustainable and does not erode. Right? Does that sound right? So that's what you have to have.
On a quarterly basis.
On a quarterly basis.
Right.
Predictable. Now, we're on a lot of boards. We see that, like super predictability. Yeah, we're smiling. No, it's very, very difficult. A lot of times we're in emerging markets, so we can't even begin to see what all the factors are, even before this administration, that would sort of get in the way of achieving that. But you have to be able to see that kind of predictability, you know, before you really can consider going public.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Jessica or Jason?
Yeah, no, I think the margin health of the company is really important. And so what investors believe about, you know, not just eroding margins, but the reverse of that is, can you improve your margins, maybe quarter over quarter, year over year? I mean, there has to be a path to somewhere. And I think that is one of the things that with the Keris IPO, there was pretty strong performance. Now that company was founded in 2008. It's been around for a long time.
That's a biotech company, Keris.
Yeah, Keris. It's actually a diagnostics company. And so, but that company's got, you know, pretty significant revenues now, 400 million coming in, and still not profitable, though. So there has to be that sort of path to profitability, I think, that investors can see.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is I think Nancy's point of their IPO is the presumably the right approach and right path for some companies, certainly not for others. And I would say particularly in healthcare, right, where there's so many interdependencies that are outside of that particular healthcare company's control, that the ability to have predictable and consistent quarter-over-quarter growth may be unrealistic and actually even inappropriate if we think about really that company's ability to provide value going forward. It may not be on a linear slope as they move forward. So not surprised that there's been some fluctuation in the IPO market, and not really worried about it.
Some analysts that I've spoken with have suggested that a lot of the next digital health companies who are going to join this second cohort to go public will be condition specific. Hinge, to me, Hinge is a virtual physical therapy company. They strike me, at least personally, as quite a point solution. They are focused very specifically on one condition, which is musculoskeletal pain. Are we in danger of another wave of point solution fatigue with some of these companies? I mean, this was a thing that we were talking about back in 2015, 2014.
Well,
I see you nodding.
Did you want to go?
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, well, usually, I mean, at least as I think about it, fatigue is almost is used more about the buyers. So the point fatigue, particularly around some of these companies, was around employers who are the buyers. So they just were exhausted by the evaluation of point by point by point. And anyone who's been around a long time, like me, I can say Jason, we've been around together, know that we go in these waves, which is what happens is the point solutions begin to build a platform. Not every point solution on the platform is as good as the next, but it's good enough. And so sometimes people will go for platform plays. But it's a different question about what's usable versus what's good for an IPO. I mean, when you have something like any of the MSK vendors, these are fairly simple solutions that are fairly inexpensive to pay for if you are an employer, and scale fairly easily. So that actually lends itself to people thinking it looks more, it's not SaaS, but it looks more SaaS-like in its growth and its margin. A lot of the other things that we represent are really complex clinical models being supported. And so one of the things we have to do is have to teach the market the difference between something like Hinge and something like, I use Maven, which is a women's health company, like Maven, in terms of what they deliver. So
And what would you say? How would you give me your elevator pitch?
Oh, I mean, so Maven is filling in all the white space related to women's health and family health that exists. And if anyone doesn't think about this, OBGYNs are surgeons. And I've managed many of them, and we actually have other investments in that space. And so there's a lot of care that doesn't really they don't have time to deliver. So we've created a number of overlay companies that provide support for, in the case of Maven, it's for infertility, fertility, maternity, menopause, and basically you have online virtual access to caregivers, online virtual access to peer support, online virtual access to content. It's actually part of the benefit at places like United Healthcare. It's part of the maternity benefit, which means that instead of having someone call you randomly and ask how you're doing when you're pregnant, you can actually go onto this and it will guide you through. It's not like a period tracker. This is a serious application with clinicians that work for the company and behind the scenes, along with points of view, like very, very hardcore points of view about the best way to approach these different services. These companies are chosen to drive outcomes for employers. In the case of Maven, it was unintended consequences around the payment of infertility, causing a lot of multi-births and other issues that weren't intended. So they're like, we have to we're seeing this with GLPs now, we have to wrap services around this so that we can both provide support as well as provide the actual benefit. So it's really fundamentally different, and it's a little nerve-wracking when you think about an IPO market recognizing that. Because they call it digital health. I told you I don't ever use that term because these are tech-enabled service companies. Their job is to create a service, deliver it consistently, and they use technology. That's what they are, not digital health.
Either of you have anything you want to add?
I would add that the the other component of that, and you referenced the sort of wraparound services, right? And you know, on the plus side, there has been real growth in the number of collaborative care codes that you can actually bill for that, right? So you can provide a more holistic care experience for the patient, and the providing companies or clinicians can actually bill for the services. The real challenge is, how do you make that seamless for the patient, so that the patient and the primary care physician actually really see it as a single continuum of care, as opposed to having to deal with 5 or 6 point solutions that just happen to be a wraparound around an OBGYN clinic or another provider organization.
Yeah. Companies often build technology for the healthcare system they wish existed, not the one that we actually have. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on advising your companies to avoid this common error.
I just read that on someone's website today.
Really?
Yes, how they're building for the system that should exist. And I
Nice.
thought, wow, good luck. Godspeed. Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. We have to build, while we want to build, you know, game-changing companies of lasting significance that will hopefully alter paradigms that are beneficial for patients and physicians in the delivery of care. We have to work within the constructs of the system we have today. And you know, I invest across a number of life sciences verticals, but for example, one of them is diagnostics. And you know, I could stand here all day and tell you about how diagnostics is under-reimbursed. It's an antiquated system. And now AI is bringing actually an enormous amount of opportunity to this space. And we're in this moment as investors where so many investors have been burned by diagnostics companies requiring more capital to get to the commercial kind of endpoint that you need to get to. That there's now a shortage of VC investors who are backing these companies at precisely the moment where the science is getting really interesting. And so I think when you're thinking about this problem of like, what is the world we actually live in? Well, we live in a world where we need, that needs to be fixed from a policy perspective. Like, that's a bigger problem than venture capitalists can fix. And believe me, Brooke Byers at Kleiner Perkins, God bless him, he worked for like 2 decades from a policy lens to try to get these problems fixed. But ultimately, it's going to require legislative change and policy changes. Right now, diagnostic testing makes up less than 2% of the overall cost of Medicare, and yet it impacts 70% of healthcare decisions. And so that's an example of like, you have to build for the world you live in. And so how I come at that with my portfolio is, you know, we've got to be capital efficient around every corner. We have to measure twice, cut once. We don't get to try it twice, right? Like, we have to do the right experiments out the gate. If we think if there's any chance we may not get it right, then enroll 3 tubes of blood, not 1, when we do that study, so that we've got the other 2 in the freezer. And I think there is just this amount of, like, you have to kind of be deeply entrenched to know where those things are that trip these companies up over and over again. But at the same time, it's not an infinite number of things. And so, you know, I think it is the reality that we live in, and diagnostics, and then I'll get off of it, you know, has also had this, we're going to regulate it. The FDA is going to regulate it. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Yes, it is. For 20 years, this has been going on. And so the companies I'm working with today are all planning to go an FDA path. And then this current administration came in and all that got thrown out the window. But we're still planning to go an FDA path. It will be a barrier to entry. It will be better for patients. But I think the uncertainty is also something that, you know, we have to live with in this industry.
When I spent some time within the Blue Cross system, and I will never forget, back 2014 or so, we organized a reverse pitch where we had 3 executives come and talk to about 150 entrepreneurs. Here are the problems we're trying to solve. And I remember we were in New Hampshire, and I'm standing watching the session go on, and an entrepreneur came up to me and, Jason, I got this great idea. And they gave me the great, and it truly was. It was something, they were designing a solution that was I think, for the way they wanted to see the healthcare system. And I listened intently, and I said, how are you going to get paid for that? And they said, oh, you're going to pay us, the health plan. I said, not a prayer in hell. We would pay you for that. You want us to outlay a significant amount of money for a benefit many years off in the future, and I don't know that that person's my member, 10 years down the road. So, one of the pieces of advice that I give entrepreneurs often is, A, understand how the reimbursement system works and how the dollars flow between payers and providers and employers, for that matter, let alone Medicare and Medicaid. And I find all too often folks don't really have a full grasp of how healthcare finance really works.
Yeah. There have been a few highly valued companies who've taken institutional investing from very high-profile healthcare firms and have flamed out. Is this a problem of VCs not auditing their companies enough?
There's no doubt that you could go back to 2018 or so, and valuations were going through the roof. And I think venture, private equity, many different forms of investors, thought about TAM. Oh, how big is the opportunity? And we'll just throw money at it, and EBITDA will come, to Nancy's point, sometime down the road. We don't have to think about EBITDA. We're going to see a spectacular IPO, and of course that gravy train ended. And so I think what we're seeing now, the pendulum has swung back. You might argue it's swung a little too far, where there's, I think, a little reluctance to invest just in growth. It has to be profitable growth, and that profitable growth has to happen sooner rather than later. So I don't think folks didn't monitor or audit companies appropriately. We just sort of took our eye off the ball as to what were the fundamentals that made for a good company and ultimately would make for a good investment.
I have a few things to say about that. I do think there are firms, and I think we probably are represented here, that really actually know how to value and know what's sustainable, know what's tied to a parlor trick or a piece of legislation that might disappear or something else. And we try to do really sustainable businesses, but we had a period of time that we just came out of where there were a lot of tourists, or whatever you want to call them, people coming into the market that were not healthcare investors, Silicon Valley, and they didn't know what they were looking at. They didn't know anything about healthcare. They didn't know how to connect the dots. They didn't know that a revenue basis was claims dollars, were pass-through dollars, like basic fundamental things. Again, we would see it, and sometimes these were our companies that we had gone in, and they're coming in behind us. They're bidding up this price. We're telling the CEOs, like, you're going to have to live up to this. This is, you're going to have to live up to this, and we know the fundamentals. We actually aren't in a place to fundamentally stop them from taking money at a certain valuation, in most cases. And things were valued at that time as a multiple of revenue. That's how we invested for the last 8 years or more. I don't know, however long. I've been only doing it for 11, so it's for most of those years. Now the companies will only come out and be valued, whether we're transacting them to be bought by someone else or whatever, based on a multiple of EBITDA. Even I don't do math well, but you can know there's a huge difference between those two numbers. Right. A huge difference. So what happens is a lot of these got bid up. The fundamentals weren't there to sustain that valuation of billions. We had one unicorn after another. I don't think they're unicorns anymore when there's like a lot of them, but anyway. And the market corrected. Mm-hmm. And as painful as it was, the ones that really, some people got caught in crossfire, but for the most part, it's made it a healthier market. Mm-hmm. So when you are trying to manage companies where money's falling from the sky and everyone's chasing them to put more money in, it's hard as a board member to get their attention and say, here are some fundamental words: unit economics, EBITDA. I'm being funny, but it wasn't funny. And now we have everyone really creating beautiful, sustainable companies, but they had to take a step back. And hopefully they survive their step back and then their step forward.
Yeah, I understand the piece about tourist investors, but some of these companies are companies that were backed almost exclusively by large, big-name venture firms who are known for their expertise in healthcare. How do you explain those kinds of scenarios, and like what lessons have we learned?
I don't want to ask you which companies you're
I know,
referring
I'm like,
to.
I want to know, but I don't want to know.
I mean, it could, I don't know. I don't know how to, if Theranos, I don't know. I don't know how to look at it. I was going to say
No.
the other thing that happens sometimes is there's just fraud.
Yeah,
Like
and
fraud. And so that, I haven't dealt with, it personally, but when I've seen it from close up, but it wasn't one of my companies, but I was near a few as an operator, and it's fraud. Like you don't, and so that happens. But I don't know, again, I know we
another
don't want to
one?
give examples.
Yeah,
but
I would say, I think one of the things that happened was, interest rates were so low for so long. They had a lot of dry powder that they had to put to work. And there was so much money sitting out on the table that they thought, particularly perhaps some of the larger firms that you're talking about, literally had to do something. And they couldn't put the money in the mattress any longer.
Right.
So they put it to work, and yeah, they knew they were overpaying for many of these investments, but thought, what are my options? Honestly, I think that's part of what happened.
I want to switch gears a little bit and talk to you, because we have so many experts you guys are going to have great answers to this question. I know you are. It's about hospital investment, strategic investment, and partnerships. A lot of times, startups will take an investment from a strategic investor that is a health system, like a Kaiser, for example. How do you advise your companies in terms of taking that investment to avoid the problem of essentially creating a company that is bespoke and perfect for that health system, but can't be translated to that of another health system? I see you both smiling.
No, I can
yeah,
start.
Nancy's got that.
I love strategic investors that are strategic. I love strategic investors that are strategic. They're not all strategic. You were great. You were so strategic. It was one of those.
Like, wait, is she talking about me here?
Yeah, no. And what I mean by that is that, first of all, I think the days, since most of these companies are sort of single instance software, like they're not doing bespoke stuff, that's not happening, but you can be overwhelmed. So we're very clear. I have some of my portfolio companies out here in the audience. We're very clear when we take the strategic dollars. One is there's, a couple of things that have to happen. One is, are other strategics going to feel like, oh my gosh, if Kaiser's in, then, Shield doesn't want to come in. So one is you have to make everyone feel comfortable that this is money that's coming in and partnerships, but they're not, privy to everything going on and guiding things that are going to benefit them more. The second thing is, are they strategic? Like, what actually is their strategic value? They don't give a lot, I won't say things perfectly, but they don't tend to give a lot of money. You're not really going to them for the money.
Right.
You're going to them for their view of whatever industry they represent. You're going to them to say, hey, you said we're going to do a pilot, and you haven't shown up at a meeting in 4 weeks, and it would be good if people could show up at this meeting. They referenceable because you're United Healthcare, and so Anthem would be interested in what's your point of view. And then they're through difficult times, like Optum Ventures was there when Change Healthcare couldn't pay. Because they own that company. A lot of the venture-backed companies they supported got hurt by that. They stepped up and helped, which is kind of a weird example and something you don't expect. But so anyone who sells their soul to a big company to be their anchor and then takes 100% of their direction from that company, so they have the perfect Geisinger, solution, is destined to fail unless Geisinger is going to buy it from them.
So do you essentially advise companies to not take only one strategic hospital investor, to try to take more than one, or to just not be too embedded?
It's kind of rare. I don't know about you guys. It's rare in my world that we would take one. And in some of them we've had, I'm looking at like 10, and they don't have any rights. I don't mean that in a condescending way. I mean that in a we give them information, but they don't come to the board meetings, they don't guide, things like that. So and probably you can speak to you had to deal with that in some cases to be strategic, but also cordoned off a little bit.
Yeah, we had to create that barrier between.
And remind everyone your background.
So used to run the corporate venture group at Blue Cross of Massachusetts. And interestingly, I was also chief strategy officer of the plan, so sort of I had my foot in both camps, but we really did have to think, this is an investment, it's a strategic investment, but we will not let the plan dictate what this company does. And certainly, I was fortunate in the position that I could make that argument. But it can be a challenge, and particularly for some of the larger strategic investors who get to companies early on. They run one pilot with a very large health system or a large payer, and the pilot goes well, and the payer wants to put money in, and they're kind of trapped at that point. So, one of the things that I advised folks when I was at Blue Cross and now at SIA is, money's great, and advice that my investment committee chair called me the day after we launched Zaffer Investments, which was the Blue Cross corporate VC. He called me 8 o'clock the next morning after the board had approved a large sum of money for it. And I thought, oh, this can't be good. They changed their mind. It's 8 o'clock. Why is he calling me? And he said, Jason, don't ever forget, money is a commodity. Right? You've got to add value for these portfolio companies in differentiated ways, many of the ways that Nancy was talking about. I tell that story to portfolio companies. So there is money out there. If you've got a great solution, you can provide value and you can show that you're going to provide outsized value going forward, you can find money. Just don't take the easiest path, because it often may not be the right path for you.
Right. Yeah, I think the other thing I would add on strategic investors, maybe not so much from the health system, but from the biopharma lens. We have a lot of biopharma investors, and you have to be really careful, because on the one hand, they can be great partners and give your company access to parts of the organization that will give them feedback and pilot the product. On the other hand, once that pilot is done and they don't like how it worked out, the company can land in no man's land. And so you have to assess those, I think, pretty carefully. And then there are other strategic investors who, for example, LabCorp Ventures does a ton, and they're just really helpful. Just a really helpful team. Try to stay out of the way, help if they can.
Yeah, what does helpful actually look like?
Yeah, and so they're like, if you bring them a question, I'm struggling with how this is going to work in a regulatory context, they will pull the regulatory people in and say, you guys should all talk. I have some smart regulatory people who can help you with that. And their portfolio companies, they have a portfolio company dinner every year, and everyone gets together, and they really build camaraderie, but they're not there to tell you how to run your business or run some pilot. I think they're there to keep the diagnostics industry alive.
Yeah, I would second that. We're in a company that LabCorp is a strategic investor. They're an observer on the board.
Yeah.
They're not on the board. Yeah. And the amount of resources that they make available to our portfolio companies, from their scientists, their regulatory affairs, their market access folks, it is significant. So shout out to LabCorp.
To LabCorp.
Yeah, since we're talking about hospitals and startups, I think you all know what I'm going to ask. The valuations that venture companies have been placing on AI scribes suggests to me that they see them as being much more than scribing companies. If that's true, what will they become, and do you think they have what it takes to get there?
I didn't hear, I'm sorry, I honestly, this isn't a delay tactic. I actually didn't hear
AI
the beginning
scribes have
scribes, yeah, oh yeah.
been given valuations that are so high they suggest they're doing a lot more than scribing. And they have said that they are planning to do a lot more than scribing. Do you think that they have what it takes to get there?
Okay.
And we're not mentioning specific companies.
No.
Yeah.
Let's really not do that.
Yeah.
So I think, these are in the category of fast-growing companies, right? Like, there's just not that many categories where you're like, they're getting hundreds of % year-over-year growth, right? This is a hot topic because everyone hated the EMR so much. They need physician and clinician efficiency is important, and these scribe companies, and early ones, I was working some of these things back in the 90s or whatever, but now these scribe companies are working. And again, I think it's, they're in sort of this really unique category, but they're also getting amazing erosion around their pricing. I sit on not an oak board, but an independent board, and we just switched vendors, and we're paying 10% of what we were for a comparable product. So what people are betting on, I would guess, is they're betting on them becoming something else, meaning not getting rid of what they're doing, but now that they've got this data, what are they going to do with it? I know a lot about this subject because I'm in a company called Regard, which sits right there and takes the data that's now really just being written down with no brain, and turns it into something very usable. So for me, that was more exciting to actually go to something that wasn't growing as fast, but was adding more value in the opinion of the chief medical officer and the chief financial officer of the hospitals. So that's what people are doing, is they're betting. They're betting on winners. Some of them are betting on multiple winners at once. And they are believing their future stories. That's my assessment.
But their future stories can be transformational. And I say this, look, I can spell AI, that's about it. But as I think about these scribe companies, I think about, to your point, the data they're collecting and what they, as agentic AI continues to grow, what can they do with that? So can they move into supporting diagnoses, right, and supporting the clinician in diagnoses, in enhancing those diagnoses? Can they move into providing a care coordination function as the AI learns more about Jason, more about Jason's comorbidities and chronic diseases and where else I am getting care in the system? Can that AI tool help coordinate that for me going forward? And then perhaps most importantly, from a patient perspective, can that AI tool help me navigate this system? Embarrassing story that I'll tell, and I please keep it in this room. So I've been in and around healthcare for a long time. Left Blue Cross, Massachusetts, actually. My wife and I moved up to Vermont, and suddenly for the first time in my life, I had to buy health insurance on my own. I was also on the Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont board. I had no idea what to do. I literally had to call member services to get them to help me walk through the process. Right, so I think if I can't figure it out, I'm guessing that there are a large majority of folks in the country that really struggle with that. So can we get an AI tool that captures data, that helps the clinicians with diagnoses, that provides a care coordination function so that the extended care team actually works together and has access to all of the same information, not just because they can go into the EMR, but they actually have meaningful, actionable information and can help me navigate the system? Then I think those valuations can be...
And that will happen. The question is who does it? Like, they could do it, Epic could do it.
Right.
I already have companies in market that are doing it, so that's it. But you're right. The multiples assume they're going to just absolutely say, yeah, you're going to do it, and you're getting rewarded for that way in advance, which is a bet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you were describing what you were describing, I was like, oh, I think I know of a company that does that. It's called Epic.
Oh, no, they don't do that.
Well, they do some of it, and like the whole.
But you always have to live in fear they could. But you have to understand legacy, the concept. I sold 2 of my companies when I was an operator to McKesson, and I learned the definition of like legacy vendors. When you have a big installed base, you're beholden to that installed base to keep your core product like functioning. And so these are now big legacy installed base companies. And I'm not saying they can't. Anyone could do these things. It's just, and this is the thing with Epic, and Judy's a master at knowing exactly what lanes she's in and what lanes she's not in. And, but everyone has to, keep an eye out, because if they do decide to do some of these things, they're the incumbent, so.
Right. We have some time for questions. I'd love to just kind of do a scan of the room and see if folks have questions now. I can continue asking some. Oh, I see one. Yes.
You don't get to ask a question.
For a long time, patients have does that change some of your big bets? Consumer healthcare companies have been, a graveyard. Are we at an inflection point where you guys are starting to see that consumers, whether because of their generation or technology, are actually changing business models for companies to invest in?
Jack. That's Jack Carter from Unite Us, one of my favorite companies I get to back. So I did a podcast today, and at the end of it, there was a question of like, what would be your moonshot? What would be your thing? And I'm like, there's not a silver bullet, but Jason will love this. I said I'd put everyone back into a staff model HMO. Right? So that's Kaiser, the Kaiser model. We had it in Boston called Harvard Community Health Plan, which is we are the payer provider. All the incentives were perfectly aligned. We studied our populations within into their life maniacally. We managed them. No one went into a hospital, out of a hospital, into an ambulance without us knowing it within minutes, right? And we had the best, you can argue this since you were at the competitor, but we had the best quality of any health plan in the US. And consumers hated it. Because he was over there, I'm blaming it on anything related to any of the blues, it's all your fault. Because they're like,
we
wait,
encourage that consumer hating it.
Yes, exactly. So they'd be like, but my friend next door goes to this surgeon at Mass General, and I want to go to him. And even though I also had Mass General surgeons, they just wanted to have choice for the sake of choice. And so I was saying it was heartbreaking for me that that consumers of healthcare they're really bad. It's the way I consume. I don't know, if I had to buy like an airplane, I wouldn't know what I was doing either. But they don't, so the models that are truly, in my opinion, the best models to get to consistent quality at a cost that we can all afford is something that consumers have rejected, and I don't see that behavior having changed. That's just my opinion. I live in Boston, people do what they want. All my favorite people are asking questions. So all the rest of you who are my favorites, you better ask questions.
Well, hello, I'm Jessica McGlory, founder of a tech-enabled end-of-life healthcare services company, Guaranteed. But
amazing company.
Appreciate
I'm
it.
not
Thank
invested, but I will be someday.
I love that. Thank you. Others can too. No, I'm just playing. But you mentioned tourists. You also mentioned, that there are times maybe some startups do some fraud and everything. And that's a lot from the perspective of a VC. How can a founder be able to see who the tourists are that are the VCs and who are the fraudulent VCs that aren't actually really ready to put in the capital to make sure our businesses can succeed in helping out all these patients?
I love this question because I work with a lot of early stage founders, and I think that one of the most important decisions you make is who you invite into those first few rounds, because you're signing up to work with somebody for a decade. And I think when you are interviewing, you're interviewing just like, it goes both ways. I would want to talk to portfolio companies, CEOs. I would, want to talk to people who know that VC. Also, you can very clearly see on their website what they invest in. I was blown away the other day by this very awesome technology out of Stanford. And I looked at who was leading the deal, and it was like a health and beauty. And I was like, this makes no sense. And I called up the entrepreneur, and I was like, I know this was probably your highest term sheet, and we're not even going to put in a term sheet. But like, are you sure you want to do this? Because I don't think these people really understand your business. And this is going to be a long road. And so I think setting it up right is really important. And I don't think it's always about taking the biggest, highest valuation. I know that's a hard thing to hear. But I really, it just comes back to that basic people are everything. And you want people who believe in you, who believe in the business, and who have seen what you're going to see before so that they're not freaked out. So they can be in the trenches with you, figuring out how to solve it instead of panicking. That's my best advice.
Hi, I'm Kim Smith. I'm founder of Health Evolve Technologies. We focus on remote patient monitoring for birthing women at risk for cardiometabolic disease. And my background is hospital leadership, but when I decided to leap and to build this in January 2023, a friend of mine who's a VC said, you picked the worst time in the history of technology to start a healthcare technology company. But gratefully, we've been able to build, test, pilot, and get to our first multi-year contract in 2 years. My question now that we're looking at capital is institutional investments versus traditional VCs. I'm learning some of the concerns of traditional VCs, or even some family offices that have questions about those that go the institutional route or have a combination of those on their cap table. And I'm just curious your thoughts on it, what conversations are happening now, especially with the market still a bit different. And would love your feedback on institutional versus traditional VC.
I'm not laughing. It does sound like I think it sort of depends. Like, it's hard. It depends. Like, for some people, we have repeat entrepreneurs where before the new thought comes out of their head, they have people with checks lined up, you know. And then there's folks who have really, really good ideas who are just breaking in during a difficult time when people don't want to take risk. We're in a risky business, but like, we took more than we wanted, you know. So I think what you do is you can't, in my opinion, you can't create this line of like, I think you talk to, not everyone, but a number of people from both sides and see what they have to offer. But this, going back to the last question, we distinguish ourselves on being healthcare experts. Like, we're, most of us, well, not most of us, but many of us have been operators. And so I'm working with companies every day, like digging in with health systems, with payers, I think we recruited 45 C-suite people into our companies last year through our people team, regulatory, like all of those things. So just talk to people, find someone that you can relate to get that first, I don't know if it's your first check or whatever, and then you'll be in a different position going the next stage, and then continue to create a list of what competency you're trying to fill out. It's like people say that to me when they're trying to fill a board position, and they start just randomly naming people. I'm like, what are you doing? What are you solving to? Like, are you saying, what? So just keep track of that. Like, here are the things that you need help on, and check them off when you begin to have that, either through your investor or through board members or through your team. This gentleman's had his hand up.
To your earlier point about being tech-enabled versus pure tech,
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I've found there's a lot of over-promising of what the technology is going to do on its own, and then I haven't found one company that's a pure technology company.
I love that. Well, so I learned this lesson being an executive at a company called Athena Health. I don't know if people know Athena, but Athena, and so many people today still don't have any idea what it is, but because they'll be like, oh, the EMR company? I'm like, literally my heart stops a little. I mean, what they decided was that if you put tech into the hands of end users, different things will come out. Like, if we put Word into the hands of a great writer, you get a great book. You put it in my hands, who knows what you get a couple bullets. Like, it's tech. It's all the same tech.
Nothing wrong with bullets.
Thank you. So what the basis of Athena was, why should every single physician office in the country, whatever, play along, figure out how to do billing. Like, figure out, and when I mean it, I mean like seriously figure it out. What are all the rules? How do you get paid what's owed to you? How do you do it efficiently and effectively? So on and so forth. Why should everyone become an expert? And they can't become an expert. It's not the best use of their talent. So Athena created technology which you couldn't buy. We used to say this all the time. You can't buy it. Nope, you get a service. It's sort of like you're on Fidelity, you get a piece of tech, whatever. So you basically pay us a percentage of collections. We are motivated to get you your collections and to do it efficiently. And if there's a sudden repricing of every single claim that came through CMS, which happens, we have to deal with it. We have to deal with all of the changes. And so and we become experts because we're supporting whatever, I don't know, back when I was there was 100,000 providers. We would find a rule that would cause a claim to fail in New York and have the rule built into the system by the time California woke up, because it was single instance. Like, this is a tech-enabled service, which is, we wanted to consistently put this service across. The issue we ran into is people were like, well, no, that's not how we do it. We do it differently. We drop claims on Thursdays, not Tuesdays. And we're like, we have maniacally focused this, and we can tell you that you'll have a 2% chance, and I'm not kidding. A lot of Harvard people, like, nothing else to do but study all this stuff. 2% chance of this thing getting paid if you do it on this day, right? So this is what we're talking about, is let people become experts. Let all of the other folks in the healthcare system be who they are, doctors, nurses, caregivers, and then let us provide the support that's needed. But we have to deliver it as a service, or the outcome will be variable. Does that make sense? Okay.
Hi there. Thanks so much for this. Sinan Ibrahim, founder and CEO of Delphina. I'd be really curious to hear your take on value-based contracts, or so-called alternative payment models, and the role they'll play in kind of this higher bar IPO. I think that was something that Hinge actually did quite well and enabled them to achieve those kinds of margins. So we'd love to hear your take on that for companies that are angling for the next generation of IPOs. Thanks.
So I'll start. I think value-based contracting, if we truly get into real upside and downside risk, can be transformational. I think our challenge right now is that there's not an infrastructure in place to allow all providers to equally participate and have a real chance of success in a value-based contract. So I'll go one step further, and this is somewhat provocative. I think actually value-based contracting and where we are right now has actually accelerated health disparities, right? Because FQHCs, other providers that are serving predominantly low-income Medicaid populations typically don't have the infrastructure, right? They don't have Athena. They don't have the ability to connect their EMR with their contracting system to really understand how do we maximize the value, how do we ensure we are getting credit for all of the great work we're doing on the clinical side and getting credit for that on the contracting side. And so who suffers from that, right? It becomes a spiral that those providers don't get the upside value promised in these value-based contracts. They fall behind, just barely miss it every quarter. Well, lo and behold, it's the patient who ultimately suffers from that. If we can solve that problem, we can get real upside and downside risk, and we can provide the infrastructure for those providers that are serving disproportionately low-income, underserved, and vulnerable populations, then I think value-based contracting really has an opportunity to help bend the cost curve going forward. Until we have that, I'm not so sure that we're going to see equitable value from a value-based contract. And that's coming from a guy who was at Blue Cross of Massachusetts,
I was going to say,
who really
an innovator,
started the first
an innovator in this, yes.
in the value-based contracting space.
I mean, I'll take a completely different angle, but not a different opinion, a different angle, which is almost all of our companies. So when someone presents to us that they're going to come in and they're going to be able to take care of kidney patients in a way that's unique and get to a certain outcome that's going to benefit whoever the payer is and the patient and everyone else, then we have to look at the economics. We have to look at, okay, you have a service you're going to deliver, you've got to find these patients, engage these patients, you've got to provide sometimes a physical plant, virtual technology. What does that cost you? What does it really cost you? And then someone's going to pay you something for that. And it's got to be above a normal fee schedule. That's all there is to it. They've got to be paid for the work that they're doing. And we started in the world with these unbelievably complicated value-based contracts. It cost almost more money to reconcile the contracts than what you made on the upside of the contracts. And what I'm seeing is a complete swing where payers do not want to do value-based contracts. They want to reward value, but they're trying to do it in ways that aren't wildly complicated. So they'll say, we're going to make sure that people know about this particular, GI group or this OUD group or whatever mental health group. We're going to make sure that we promote that group and other groups because we know the outcomes are really, really, really good, and they're going to pay above average fee schedule. And we have to explain often, if this is what you want, if you want us to find these patients like we just bought an FQHC, so if you want us to go find these patients and affect change, there's work that has to be done. You can audit the work if you want, but there's work that has to be done. So we don't care what form it comes in. We want it to be simple. It doesn't have to have an audit every 3 weeks. That costs a ton with reconciliation, and it has to be more than what it costs for us to serve. And it's our job to get the cost to serve down so that there's incremental amount, or it's not a sustainable business. So it doesn't matter if people say, is it value-based, it's not value-based. It's the fact that it's no longer fee for service, like pay for whatever. It's pay for an outcome. How it gets paid for is evolving.
And with that, we are perfectly out of time, literally counted down to the minute, to the second. So thank you all so much for joining us. Appreciate it. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
Yeah.